Released on October 23, 1988 in Japan, 2 years later on February 12, 1990 in North America, and eventually on August 29, 1991 in the PAL region, Super Mario Bros. 3 is often acclaimed by critics as one of the greatest video games of all time. It was first seen in the Western world when used in the movie The Wizard as part of a fictional gaming tournament held at Universal Studios Hollywood, and although it has a cult following now, the film was generally bashed by critics upon its release. Considered by most of them as nothing more than an advertisement for both Universal Studios and of course Nintendo, whose products are featured extensively throughout, the cast as a role called for all the usual 80s faces, with Fred Savage, Christian Slater, Beau Bridges and Jenny Lewis, all in lead roles, and even though he's uncredited, believe it or not, The Wizard was Tobey Maguire's film debut. Based around Jimmy Woods, a young boy suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder since the death of his twin sister 2 years earlier, the film was labelled tacky and a blatant plagiarism of the 1988 film Rain Man, even though Dustin Hoffman's character was actually autistic. Both did seem to have savant syndrome, however, something Jimmy's brother Corey would take advantage of as they make their way across the country to Video Armageddon, the gaming tournament in the film that had a $50,000 grand prize. Video Armageddon no doubt went on to influence the creation of a real-life competition in 1990 called the Nintendo World Championships, but I'll discuss that in more detail at another time. The Wizard wasn't Nintendo's first leap into the world of film or television though, not by a long shot. By 1986, Mario was already a household name in Japan, so much so that Grouper Productions approached Nintendo about making a Super Mario Bros. Anime. It would be the first ever movie based on a video game, and also the first time Shigeru Miyamoto was credited as Mario's creator, something that was a well-kept secret at the time. Super Mario Bros. The Great Mission to Save Princess Peach was produced as a tie-in to the Japanese version of Super Mario Bros. 2, or as we know it in the Western world, the Lost Levels. Although it was only ever released in Japan, everything from phone cards, watches, noodles, manga, riddle books and more were produced to advertise the movie. When released theatrically on July 20th and shown exclusively at Soku Theatres, it was displayed as part of a double feature, alongside a video guide for the Japanese version of Super Mario Bros. 2. North America would get its own quote of Super Mario Bros. On their screens in 1989, with DiC Entertainment, much like Grouper Productions before them, approaching Nintendo about the possibility. Andy Hayward, DiC's then CEO, spent nearly a year convincing Nintendo to license their characters. Instead of a once-off movie, it would be a TV series however, a mix of live action and animation, and much like its predecessor, would boost awareness of the characters. Back then, Nintendo of America felt the Japanese version of Super Mario Bros. 2 was too similar to Super Mario Bros. 1, but more importantly, they felt it was too hard. Originally, Super Mario Bros. 2 was to be a two-player vertically scrolling co-op game, but this prototype was later rebranded Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic to tie in with Fuji Television's Media Technology Expo. When NOA found the finalised Japanese version of the game not to their liking, it was decided to revisit Doki Doki Panic, improve it, and convert it back into the bastardised version of Super Mario Bros. 2 we all know today. And so, the aim of DiC's new TV series would be to familiarise the public with Mario in his new surroundings, and as such, would be based primarily upon both Western versions of the Mario Bros. Games. Produced by DiC Animation and distributed by Viacom Entertainment, all in association with Nintendo of America, the Super Mario Bros. Super Show first aired on September 4th, 1989. As part of the live-action segment of the show, Luigi was played by Danny Wells, a man known primarily for his 11-year stint as Charlie the bartender on The Jeffersons, and Captain Lou Albano played Mario. If you've even the slightest interest in wrestling, you probably already know who Albano is, but if not, in short, he's widely accepted as being one of the most influential people to ever have been in the industry, having both wrestled as well as managed others, even collaborating with Cyndi Lauper at one stage, which aided wrestling in its attempts to appeal to a wider, more mainstream audience. This was all due to their idea for the very successful rock and wrestling connection, a cross-promotion between the World Wrestling Federation and the music industry that Lauper and Albano devised when they had met up on a trip to Puerto Rico. During the live segments of the show, several celebrities dropped by: Ernie Hudson, Magic Johnson, Roddy Piper and Sergeant Slaughter, Claire Carey, Vanna White, Nicole Eggert and even Lou Albano's friend Cyndi Lauper and more were all guests on the show. In Lauper's episode, Lou even cameoed as himself, by leaving the scene only to reappear later, minus the Mario gimmick, when Cyndi cites she's looking for him and that he's even presumed missing. Keeping a similar comedy angle, Albano and Wells also once dressed up as Mario and Luigi's female cousins Marianne and Luigiana. Such was the rapport and chemistry between them. They were often left to their own devices, and these live segments were usually ad-libbed on the day of recording. In the cartoon portion of the show, a new situation was featured each episode, but was always based, however loosely, on the games. Mario, Luigi, Toad and the Princess, they were all there, and usually ended up in some sort of hijinks where they had to protect the kingdom from the evil Koopa. Movies and pop culture parodies were often used throughout, with Mario even reciting a plumber's log at the beginning of each episode, in the homage to Shatner's captain's log in the Star Trek TV series. The Super Mario Bros. Super Show boasted such voice actors as John Stocker, Janie Ellis and Harvey Atkin, and running 5 nights a week from September 4th through December 1st, with The Legend of Zelda replacing the Super Mario Bros. Cartoon segment for Friday night showing. It was no shock to anyone that within the first week of its premiere, it was already the highest rated first run syndicated series of the time. Sadly, although it was enjoyed by the public, critics seemed to universally bash it and felt it relied too heavily on slapstick. So within 2 weeks of its release, its ratings had already dropped, and it was being beaten by Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers, while Muppet Baby reruns were chomping closely on its heels. Kids Klassics, a subsidiary of GoodTimes Entertainment, would go on to release episodes on VHS in the late 80s and early 90s, and the show ran in syndication across several channels worldwide for years to come, but it was just to be the start of DiC's association with Nintendo of America. There was another game coming after all. With Super Mario Bros. 3 still in development, DiC began working on an accompanying cartoon. The game, which would take more than 2 years to complete, was still a work in progress, and changes were regularly being made as they went. For example, did you know the original idea for Mario was to change into a centaur and not a raccoon, but this was dropped to allow him the ability to fly. New enemies were also being added, and existing enemies were being altered, and even saw the introduction of chain chomps, something that was based on a bad experience Miyamoto had with a dog in his childhood. But probably the most standout addition of the game came in the form of King Koopa's underlings. Bowser's offspring, the Koopalings, are actually a tribute from Miyamoto to 7 of his programmers. As a thank you for all their hard work and effort, they would be immortalised forever in the game. When DiC began working on the TV series, however, they were still unnamed. You see, Nintendo had just been drip feeding them their new ideas for enemies and power-ups, as they'd been thought about themselves during the development. Rather than hold up production or leave them out entirely, DiC decided to power ahead and name them all themselves, in accordance to their personalities as they were being written for the animated TV show. We all know them now as their names as they appear in the Super Mario Bros. 3 game, Nintendo choosing to name them after famous musicians and composers, but in the cartoon they all started out quite differently. Wendy was known as Cootie Pie, Larry as Cheatsy, Roy as Bully, Morton as Big Mouth, Ludwig as Cookie, and finally Lemmy and Iggy were known as Hip and Hop respectively. This roster was addressed later in some countries when the series was redubbed for syndication, with the Koopalings then adopting their true Nintendo given titles. Despite the seemingly random naming scheme by DiC, quite a lot of thought went into the concept for each character and the backstory of the series itself, however. Whether it be Cootie Pie, the spoiled brat of the bunch that had her dad wrapped around her little finger, Toad, a humorous, fast-witted pizza and encyclopedia salesman who often saved the day when Mario and Luigi got in a bind, or the sneaky and devious Cheatsy, who was so despicable he even stole from his own family. They all had their own distinguishable characteristics. The series itself first aired on September the 8th of 1990 and introduced us to a brand new storyline, now concentrating solely on the third game. Unlike the Super Mario Bros. Super Show before it starts with the Mushroom Kingdom finally free from King Koopa's troublesome antics. Having chased him into a banishment zone and then sealing the entranceway with 10,000 bricks, Mario and Luigi were celebrated as heroes kingdom-wide and even had a feast thrown in their honour. As was probably inevitable, King Koopa manages to escape and is now angrier than ever, so returns hell-bent on revenge with his 7 kids in tow. Distressed and not knowing who else to turn to, the princess calls once again on the Super Mario Brothers to do what they do best: save the day. Airing on NBC in a programming block alongside Captain N the Games Master, The Adventures of Super Mario Bros. 3 featured an entirely fresh cast of voice actors, with the exception of Harvey Atkin and John Stocker, who reprised their roles as King Koopa and Toad respectively. Among the new faces, or voice actors if you will, Dan Hennessey played Bully Koopa, Tracey Moore Princess Toadstool, Tabitha St. Germaine Cookie Pie, and Tara Strong played both Hip and Hop respectively. It had quite the star-studded ensemble, and on its first broadcasting run ran for just under 3 months, until December 1st, when it culminated in its 26th and final episode, entitled Super Koopa. In it, we would see Hip and Hop creating yet another one of their crazy inventions, a pendant that would grant King Koopa the same powers as Mario and Luigi. Its only drawback? The pendant would only work in the real world, a bonus in disguise for Bowser, as the Mario brothers wouldn't have access to the power-ups themselves there. I actually did a trade a while back with a friend of mine for the script of this very episode. It was a good trade, it favoured both of us, and on a few separate occasions since, we discussed the relevance of the markings throughout, never really coming up with anything. That was until recently. Deke Entertainment, Diffusion Information Communications, began in France in 1971 but founded an American base in Burbank, California in 1982, with former Hanna-Barbera storywriter Andy Hayward as its chairman and CEO. There they created such successful animation shows as Inspector Gadget, The Real Ghostbusters, Captain Planet and the Planeteers, Sonic the Hedgehog, 3 animated series based on the Super Mario Bros. Franchise, and more. Also known as The Incredible World of Deke or Deke Animation City, the company was acquired by Cookie Jar Group in 2008 and folded into it, with Cookie Jar Group itself taken over by DHX Media in October of 2012. As you can imagine, this made finding out any extra information about the script quite difficult initially. So what do I know about it for certain? Seamus purchased it from a film and movie memorabilia shop off Regent Street in London many years back when he lived over there, and although the shop is now closed, at the time also sold several other similar items like concept sketches and animation cells. The Super Mario Bros. 3 script itself does have some nice clues and leads, as it's notarized and stamped, but unlike some of the other items also purchased at the same time, seems to contain, to me at least, no other obvious labellings, brandings or identifying marks. The thing about script writing is that it has a certain set of undefined rules. They are always typed. The font is traditionally Courier size 12. All pages are numbered except for the cover page, and a space should be left between what each character says, as this will make it easier to add notes and ideas in the future if necessary. This script was written for Tara Strong, Michael Stark, Harvey Atkin, Walter Boone, Tony Rosato, Tracey Moore, John Stocker and Paulina Gillis, and as you can see here, seems to have been altered from how it was originally written. Dialogue has been scribbled out in places and added in others, but most importantly, when I eventually had time to sit down and view the episode in its entirety, something else struck me immediately. Bits of the script as written here are missing completely in the finished version of the cartoon. All Mario's mentions and interactions with the gendarme, the French police, and the captain's rant about being locked in the dungeon of the Bastille, they all seem to have disappeared. What it did next could possibly be described as stalking, harassment, or at the very least mass spamming. I searched and found as many contact details as was humanly possible for anybody that was ever involved in the show and messaged them all. The then head of Deke, the show's producer, editors, developers, directors, voice actors and their friends. I contacted everyone, and sadly I learned the multi-talented Tony Rosato and Harvey Atkin, Luigi and Bowser respectively, both passed away in 2017, making their way to the big cloud kingdom in the sky, leaving behind them an extraordinary portfolio of work. They will both be dearly missed. TV series, movies, voiceovers and acting alike, name changes, award nominations and wins, voice coaching and digital marketing, the remaining voice actors are now an eclectic bunch all spread out across many different projects. Some are now representing themselves, others are with agencies, and others still no longer in the game. This wasn't going to be easy and took quite a bit of time, but what happened next caused me to mark out quite a bit. Suddenly people started responding. Sure, they were just email auto responses and talent agency brush-offs at first, but then I started hearing from actual people. One agency even told me that the talent was no longer on their books, hadn't been for quite some time, and that if I do track him down, to forward on his contact information to them, as they'd like to get in touch. I also received replies from several people who had actually had hands-on experience with the show, both voice actors and editors alike, and every single one of them showed a similar enthusiasm and expressed surprise or thanks to hear from an adult fan of the show after all these years. But most importantly, between them all, they helped me answer my many questions I had asked. I learned that for almost all animation except anime, the voice tracks are laid down first, before being appropriately edited, with the pictures fabricated next by hand or computer graphics, and that this was exactly the way that this series was created. Although I presumed, and it was even suggested to me by one of them, this script could have been used by cast members during a voice recording or by a group during a table read, the lack of action notes indicating positional or emotional directions to the actors means that this is quite unlikely. Those timing notations in seconds next to each line and scene number are the running times for each individual cue, and when laid end to end with a second of space between them, are collectively known as normal pause footage, or NPF, a term coined by Albano, which is used for the sequential presentation of the finished dialogue track. This is effectively the length of the show's dialogue, before the director inserts the action footage, effects and sound, and it often runs longer than the final mix, because there is no dialogue overlap, and it's merely used as a guideline to get the show up to its usual running time. The script is stamped as recorded, dated internally from the 2nd to the 10th page inclusively, as having been done so on the 7th of July 1990, and the fact that one of the editors told me means that I now know exactly what I have here. With an NPF of 352.3 seconds, featuring 10 of the show's voice actors, with omissions and differences in the dialogue from what was used on screen, this is none other than the editor's working script for the first act of the last episode of The Adventures of Super Mario Bros. 3. The difference was explained to me as most likely being due to the time constraints enforced on them at the time, with the Super Koopa episode running alongside another episode called The Venice Menace. The Venice Menace actually aired first, followed by Super Koopa, with a total running time of 22ish minutes permitted for both, to allow for adverts and messages from sponsors to be sandwiched between them when broadcast. Having grown up a massive fan of the Super Mario Bros. Games and all 3 TV series, I can honestly say getting to converse with some of the voice actors and editors that worked across the shows is up there as one of the best video game collecting memories I have to date. I will forever be grateful for the opportunities they afforded me to pick their brains, but also for the insight they gave me into their personal worlds. It truly was an honour. Many of them are still active in one way or another in the industry today, but even if you aren't aware of what they're currently working on, the chances are that at least one of these wonderful people could have moulded your childhood viewing.